Hello everyone, so it's a pleasure to be here today to present this Spire webinar on the new shape of the food industry. So before we start, let me give you some introduction on Spire. So in a nutshell, Spire is a market research consulting company. It was founded back in 2000. And our goal is to really help companies to grow and to expand overseas and in Asia. We work with a very large number of different types of projects, such as market access, competitor analysis, consumer journey, etc. And in terms of sector, food industry is one of the industry that we are working on. Okay, so a bit of background on the webinar. So we know that the COVID pandemic has affected in many ways how food businesses operate, how consumer and different players think and act. There's words that are coming in now like sustainability, food security, that are gaining really huge traction. So some of these trends are new, some we believe might fade post-vaccine, and some might come back. So today we'll have a webinar for about 1 hour. So it would be first a 30-minute presentation. We'll have 3 presentations by 3 different speakers, and it will be followed by a panel discussion. At the end of the session, we will ask and take audience questions. So you may use the Q&A function anytime during the presentation to drop your question and comments, and we will address it later. So before we dive into each of the presentation, allow me to briefly present you to the speaker. So the first speaker will be Japneet. So Japneet is our Deputy CEO in Spire Singapore. He has almost 20 years of experience in market research and consulting. He has led a large number of food-related projects with Spire. So today, Japneet will be sharing the result of a survey that we conducted in Spire with some key stakeholders in the food industry. Welcome on board, Japneet. After that, we'll have Johannes Boro, which is a guest speaker. So Johannes is a doctorate in business administration candidate of 2020 from Bocconi School of Management in Milan. He has almost 30 years of experience in hospitality industry and is one of the South Australia business career mentor. He also graduated from his MBA about 20 years ago. Johannes has presented a few webinars on the business model canvas and his application, including to Jakarta main transportation company, Transjakarta. So today, Johannes is going to share with us what is the business model canvas about and how this tool can be used to help food business players to thrive. So welcome, Johannes. The third speaker would be Alexis Yeo, so it's another guest speaker. So Alexis is the director of Carbon INQ, a local-based, nature-based education company for school and corporation as well. On the social front, Alexis Yeo founded Project 33 back in 2014. So this is a community-focused company which is around food, everything around food. So community farming, cooking, education practices, among other things. So today, Alexis is going to share with us the main trends among food local community in Singapore. Welcome, Alexis.
Thank you.
So now let's start with the first presentation. So Spire survey sharing about what food players think. And this section will be presented by our Deputy CEO of Singapore, Japneet. Japneet, over to you.
Thank you, Ingrid. I'm going to share my screen in just a minute. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time out. I'm going to take about 15 minutes and talk to you about an initiative at Singapore in the office, trends in the food sector that we wanted to talk about. So at Spire, just in this particular year, we've started to develop a list of and a database really of food sector companies. We have achieved this in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, with about between 300 to 700 companies in each of these countries. And what's interesting is that we've gone after not the very large companies that make it in the news, that are quite public about what they're thinking, who they are, what kind of work they're doing, and what trends they're either following or really making. those ones are the known entities. I think it's the tier 2 and the tier 3 that you see in this slide. Fairly sizable companies, but they aren't as visible. And a lot of them operate at a local scale. And those are the ones that, we wanted to put into our database and wanted to have conversations with. So, we've made use of the time during the COVID lockdown to start having conversations with these companies. And that's some of the things that we'll be talking about today. So who are these companies? It's really a mix across the countries, players in different parts of the supply chain. So you've got beverage companies, manufacturing, as well as reselling. We've got fishing companies, agriculture companies, large food or mid-sized food manufacturers, and the wholesalers and the retailers, as well as the food service, so your restaurants and your bars in our mix. And this database that we've created and these conversations that we've had with these companies are really about sort of identifying what sort of companies they are, profiling them in terms of their financials, their size, what kind of products and services they offer, but also looking at which segments in the market they target. What strategies do they have? Expansion, if it's happening or not happening, what plans for the future they have. So this is something going forward that we want to use at Spire to offer to our clients. We get a lot of queries from our clients about partnerships, looking for potential partners in the Southeast Asia region. And this database really helps, us to enable that. Also, we work with a lot of food ingredient companies, and I'll talk a little bit more about food ingredients in just a minute. And a lot of these companies actually make great customers. So, Ingrid mentioned one of the things that we do is market research, understanding how market dynamics work. And this database really helps us access those potential customers and understand what they're thinking. So getting down to really the meat, and I'll start off with this particular slide. This is the relative size of the food industry sector. So in the purple bars, you'll see processed food industry. And in the gray bars, you'll see food service. So Indonesia, Thailand come up, no surprises. Indonesia with its very large population, Thailand known as the food processing hub in Southeast Asia. But what's interesting is that Vietnam is a very sizable market as well. And you see that, of course, for processed food, but also in terms of the food service industry. It's a fairly sizable market as well. Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, relatively smaller, but in terms of per capita spending on food, they're quite sizable as well. So you'll see this here. This is the annual expenditure an average consumer does on food in a year. So Singapore comes up on top. Singapore GDP per capita is high, so it's a small proportion from that perspective, but they are the biggest spenders in terms of dollar value. The second one is Malaysia at $5,250 a year. Thailand, a little bit lower. Indonesia, and then Vietnam spends least amount. But again, correlates GDP per capita. Vietnam and Indonesia end up spending almost a third of their income on food expenditure. So it's an important sort of an expenditure there. Okay, so this data is a little bit dated, but calorie per capita doesn't change very radically, and you see sort of an average there. So if you read the back of any food label, the typical assumption is that people are consuming about 2,000 calories a day. So you can contrast it to this. Malaysians are relatively heavy eaters, so almost 3,000 calories per capita per day. Thailand comes in at 2007, Indonesia at 2007, similar to Vietnam as well. I think what's more interesting is really what those calories are made up of. And you'll see that here in terms of food habits. So, interestingly, Thailand and Indonesia eat higher carb-oriented diets. Malaysia does a lot more of of fatty content. That fats and oils comes up in 16%, and sugar formulations comes up at 14%. Similar to Thailand as well. What's interesting is meat-based diet. So Vietnam has a very heavy meat-based diet, and it comes up amongst the top 3. Amongst the countries that you've got here, it's the only country where meat comes up as amongst the top 3 groups. Okay, so what I want to do next is really just talk about 5 trends that we're seeing and that a lot of the food companies are talking about, and various other news media are talking about as well. So we've mixed these up. There's home dining. We want to talk a little bit about health and wellness. Food safety has become increasingly important now. An interesting trend about premiumization is coming, and sustainability. No surprises there. It's become the new buzzword. We want to talk a little bit more about what food companies are thinking about these 5 areas. Okay, so if you've been tuned onto local media, you know that people are dining at home a lot more, and you'll see this in this graph here, where depending on the country, you've got anything from 60% to 20% of the people saying that they are going to eat more at home. And this is largely driven by convenience and comfort. Now, in our survey, almost everybody that we surveyed, all food companies that we surveyed, said that convenience is going to become a very important criteria. The thing with convenience is it's actually now changing the dynamic of customer loyalty. So what's happened during the COVID lockdown is that customers have moved. And according to a survey that McKinsey conducted, anywhere between 30% to 70% of the customers have moved to new outlets. They've let go of the loyalties that they had with places that they were eating at or places they were shopping at, and they found new avenues, primarily driven by convenience or the availability of fresh food. And this is not likely to change. So even after the pandemic's gone, customers are going to tend to stick with this loyalty. So in the past, promos used to work very well, and discounts used to work very well, but that has changed. Location, convenience, availability of fresh foods has become really the drivers of customer adoption and customer retention. Okay, some of the other aspects that revolve around dining at home is sort of this domestication of the consumption experience. So, when we talk about experience, the one brand that comes to mind is Starbucks. So the whole ambience that you're unable to get at home, but we're seeing increasingly this trend where customers are trying to bring that process home. So, we've seen things like frothers for coffee or coffee machines really spike because people are now doing that at home. We also see this with ready to eat meals or ready meals. Customers are taking this food, bringing it home, and trying to have that experience. Now, what does this mean for companies? So one, there is a huge opportunity for kitchen appliances. I mentioned coffee machines. Bakeware is something that's really gone off the charts across the region, as has baking ingredients. Very often you see stockouts at grocery stores. This also means that certain pastes and premixes, the customers are going to be more open to. So we've seen restaurants say, well, here's our paste, and you can get the same taste if you use your vegetables and your ingredients and add our paste. So, so you don't have to come to the restaurant. The other interesting thing, and this was a conversation that we had with one of our clients, is that now food that used to be served to you at the restaurant now needs to be delivered. So the lead time between the kitchen and the table has increased. And, for things like French fries, and this was the conversation that we had with our client, holding time is a very important aspect. It's the time that your French fry takes to go from straight to wilted. And we've all had deliveries come to us, we open the box and you've got soggy fries, you know. So that holding time, a rather technical feature of the potatoes or the fries, has become a very critical, sort of an aspect, because now it's got to survive that journey that your grab food guy or your delivery guy is gonna do. So the dynamic there in terms of food is going to change as well. Okay. The other trend that we're seeing is this drive for health and wellness. In our survey, about 77% of the food companies said that their customers have become more mindful about what's going inside their food. You know, so earlier, if it tasted good, if it was affordable, it worked. But now customers are getting curious and concerned about what's going inside. And you know, you see things like in Thailand, there's a protein consciousness that seems to be growing. Along with this consciousness for ingredients, we're also seeing diets change. So 79% of the companies that we surveyed are considering changing their product offering because the customer diets are changing. So, you know, vegetarianism, veganism, gluten-free, low sugar, all of these have become very, very real. They're not faddish things anymore. I think just in the last month or two, and I'm using Singapore as an example, but the growth of impossible meat offerings in fast food restaurants, quick service restaurants, has just skyrocketed. So everybody has started to jump onto that plant-based alternatives, plant-based. In the groceries, we're seeing it as well. So if you look at beverages, next to your milk cartons, we're seeing almond milk, oats milk, peas milk, and all sorts of plant-based dairy that's coming in as well. So these are real trends companies say they will pull with as well. Of course, low calorie variants, low sugar, of course, continue to be a trend as well. The next area that I wanted to talk about was food authenticity and food safety. You know, we are seeing this clean label movement that's happening in ASEAN. Customers are looking for, looking at products, reading the label, and are more conscious that they're able to understand what's written on those labels. You know, so last time we had, you still see food like that. You see cornstarch instead of sugar, fructose, really complicated chemical words. Those have now become off-putting. So a clean list of simple ingredients is something that customers have really started to look for. Naturalness is a huge value proposition. So, you know, you see companies now messaging that very actively as well. There is a huge drive, and I kind of alluded to this when I was talking about customer loyalty and shifting loyalty, for fresh, organic, traceable products. And, you know, customers have become more risk averse when it comes to pesticides and chemicals being used. And this is something that I think will continue as well. And the last one there, and this was something that was peculiar about Vietnam, was the channels that they're shopping at. So wet markets are going out of fashion. It's your clean, packaged, but transparent, you know, food products that are being sold at groceries and organized supermarkets is becoming the new trend. Okay, so to talk about premiumization, this was something that's very interesting. Just a couple of days ago, I read this article in Singapore about revenge eating. So what it said is that after being locked down and cooped up in their homes, the Singaporean consumer is now going out and sort of revenge eating, which is why all the food service outlets are now packed. You see huge queues. And where that's coming is the tendency to, because of the COVID situation, we're unable to indulge in a lot of practices. So buying premium food has become one of the avenues of doing this. And it sort of links with the domestication of the consumer experience. So one famous example is Caviar Colony, where they see a lot of new customers coming in and trying entry-level caviar in their homes. We're also seeing price sensitivity drop. So the food companies that were paid huge numbers in Indonesia, 85%, or lesser, but close to 60%, are saying that if we now offer the quality assurance and the ingredients are there. The last trend I wanted to talk about was sort of food security and sustainability, and we've clubbed these together. And this is a tricky one. Alexius, I know hopefully you'll kind of touch on this topic as well. And I think we were talking earlier, you're seeing a huge boom in your business because of what I imagine are these concerns. But we're seeing consumers become more conscious about sustainability. Now, it's a double-edged sword. It is buzzword. People are looking at it very consciously, but the understanding for sustainability isn't quite there. So it's there for the brands and for the suppliers and the food companies to make that positioning and to make that message. Is security, and of course, no going seeds were distributed out. There's a goal to increase domestic production. Dependency goes from 10% up to 30%, self-reliance goes up to 30%. But it's not just Singapore. We're seeing this across all of the other regions as well. So, even in countries like Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, where you've got a mature agriculture industry, looking at productivity, looking at being more export-oriented, as well as cleaning up and sort of maturing up the supply chain is something that the government now is actively participating in. So, we are going to see these mature agriculture countries try to export more. We are going to see all countries try and become more self-sufficient. So the agriculture sector, I think, is going to see some amount of change. And this is not just COVID. I mean, we saw this disruption when China and US, the trade wars started, and both of these countries started to see shocks on both sides when agricultural products were taxed and prices went up. And lessons learned from that, I think all the countries have started to look at agriculture and domestically producing food to a very large extent. The companies, one is Asia, companies are expecting less competition after the pandemic. So 70% say that. Malaysia says the market's going to get tougher. Singapore, it's semi in the middle, but 23% say that it's going to get easier. The rest of them are either neutral. But I thought Indonesia was interesting, where they say that competition is going to actually ease off. The other interesting thing was almost all companies in Indonesia and Singapore, and a large extent in Malaysia, are saying once the pandemic's over, we are going to actively expand. That means new channels, maybe new store locations, and export of their products. Point number 3 here was interesting. So if you look at the light pink bars there, you basically see about customers preferring local ingredients. The companies think in Indonesia, everybody loves local ingredients, although they're not completely dependent on local ingredients just as yet. So only 22%, actually 22% of the companies are buying overseas products as well. Malaysia, a lot of companies are buying from overseas, but they also think that local ingredients are something that consumers will prefer. So there we're going to see a shift from overseas to local ingredients. In Singapore, it's a bit tricky. It's a small market. There is a huge propensity to bring from overseas, and I think that will sustain. Singaporean customers understand that as well. But in Indonesia, we see local ingredients are preferred, and there is a lot of local ingredients purchased. Malaysia is where it's going to convert from overseas to local. And of course, the last one I mentioned is the food companies are starting to recognize that consumers want more sustainable products. So we're going to see a lot of sustainability value propositions come out into the market as the pandemic ends. Okay, so I'm going to end with this slide. Our really key message is that change is coming, and disruptions aren't going to get over after the pandemic is done. And hopefully, Johannes, you'll shed some light on what to do about this change. But what we're seeing is there is going to be more innovation around healthy foods and more sustainable foods. And a lot of this is going to happen in the ingredients, in the back-end supplies space. Agriculture is going to transform across the country, across the region. A lot of this is going to be government-led. We're also going to see internationalization a lot more. So as consultants, we're looking forward to this, but companies are saying that they are going to grow and expand. And the other opportunity there is anything that helps companies go direct to consumers. So online channel, of course, is booming. I mentioned things like holding time, domestication of consumer experiences. So all of that is going to grow as well. And the last one is really going to be the multinational firms and the importers might be a threat because this localization and nationalization, I think, is going to take shape. Customers are going to prefer local products. So that's something to prepare for as well. Yeah, so with that, I'm going to end my presentation. I hope I've been able to provoke amongst you guys. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. I think we'll circulate these slides out.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Apni, for this presentation. A lot of things are happening in a sector. And of course, these changes are prompting the company to change what they sell, what they do. And that brings me a bridge to the next presentation, which is exactly looking at the backbone of company. What can they do in the way they operate to survive and to strive in this time, because business needs to adapt. So Johannes, would you be able to share with us a bit more about what the business model Canva is and how this model can help company to better prepare for the future?
Okay. Right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you once again for having me this morning. My name is again Johannes Boro. I'll present a topic on business strategy using business model Canvas, a method that I use in my doctoral research actually in Bocconi School of Management in Milan, and how BMC can be utilized in the food industry, particularly during this pandemic. And to begin with, let's refresh our understanding just briefly about how business model, business plan, business strategy, they actually differ. So in a simple understanding, a business model describes what we make, how to do it, who our customers are, and in the end to be sustainable either by financial measurement or non-financial measurements, such as for those NGOs, for instance. Then business planning includes more detailed information, such as how much do we need for productions, how much our selling price will be, and how much profit we may earn, etc. More specific is the business strategies. For example, what your recruitment strategy is, and how your marketing strategies, and so on. So what is business model Canvas? It's a business tool, just like Porter 5 Forces. I think many of you have heard this, SWOT analysis, and so on. A business model Canvas is also a business framework that consists of 9 elements, in which 5 elements are in front, and 4 elements in the back end, the dark red portion there. Who has been using BMCs? BMC has been used by actually also big companies as well, such as Fujitsu, MasterCard, GE, 3M, even Microsoft, and so many things, so many other companies. And for those who haven't heard of business model canvas, this is the 9 elements of business model canvas. And the question is, how can we apply these elements to our business during this pandemic? Here, while mostly I'll use the restaurant business to illustrate my presentation, some may be applicable to other businesses in the food industry as well. So basically, there are 2 situations happening here. First is the lower revenue at the front end, and to keep the cost down at the back end. Let's start from the customer segment. What can be done here? For instance, if usually you target a particular segment, for instance, a high-end market, you may think of aiming lower end or different customers too. A few popular restaurants in Bali and in the US have reportedly adopted this way to stay afloat. And then, if you add different customer segments, don't forget to offer prices that will match your new target market as well. Here we can relook at your other value propositions too. For example, if you specialize only on a particular cuisine, such as Western cuisine, probably you can also consider expanding your menu to include Asian cuisine and so on. A few restaurants also known adopting this approach to keep generating revenue, such as Indusis in Bali, and Wolfgang is a famous restaurant in group in the US. And you can also consider doing more delivery for free or at the cost by optimizing your key partners to bring the orders to your customers, as well as takeaways, as usual. And your customer relationship elements should be utilized to its fullest through your social media, including the possibility of engaging online influencers, such as this cosmetic company in China, where it managed to increase its sales significantly during the pandemic, thanks to its online influencers. And then you have to communicate your new value propositions through the media. Invite your employees, your relatives, to be part of your customer relationships by sharing your value propositions on their own social media. The channel is also well associated with your possible key partners, such as these companies, to deliver your value propositions to your customer segments. In addition to the usual channels, such as your restaurants for takeaways, your websites, supermarkets, mini markets, etc. And similarly for food producers, you can also optimize your relationship with these key partners, and make sure that what you offer is also registered on their websites or their apps too. The revenue stream. Here, additional revenue may be generated from selling ready-to-eat meals in restaurants or supermarkets or mini markets, sorry. And there is also where, for example, frozen food players, whoever doing this business here, where you can kick in as a restaurant key partners. And next, also you can try to reach out customers outside your city. Can also do upselling cooking classes or kit meals, or if possible, get any subsidy from the government, even donation from your loyal customers, like what we see in the case of the Indus restaurant in Bali. And another unusual example is by generating revenue with totally non-related partners. Some may say it's not possible, but it's possible, where we can see a Starbucks for instance, has shown us that it is doable when they entered the music business by partnering with Apple and later with Spotify. And not to forget, whatever changes you make, don't forget to optimize also your key partners and channel. Since your demands are lower, then of course your key activities must be reduced too. And as some of you are already probably doing, you may have to significantly reduce our working hours. Also think of cloud kitchen or shared kitchen, just like what these companies have done so. For those who are in Indonesia, probably you heard of this Mangkokku. It's a new startup, booming restaurant in Indonesia. And apparently they are adopting the cloud kitchen strategy. You can also think of buying raw materials together with other restaurants in order to keep getting better deals from your suppliers and so on. So those who are food producers, you have to be mindful with this strategy. On the key resources, if you already have a strong brand, you can leverage your brand when you negotiate with your key partners. Internally, if you have a few restaurants, maybe you may consider operating the strongest one only, offer UPL, which is unpaid leave options, or allowing employees to work somewhere else. For instance, like what McDonald's in Germany did, and closer to home, Singapore Airlines. And is there any other cost that can be deferred? Any insurance? What about applying for tax relief, deferment for from both local and central governments? Any rental that can be renegotiated, for instance, your space, equipment, or your vehicle, etc. So by doing so, hopefully you can improve your revenue in the front end, as well as you can decrease the cost in the back end. Again, this is how you can utilize the business model of Canvas Basic. Thank you very much. And back to you, Ingrid.
Thank you, Johannes, for sharing this. It's a very interesting business model that can help company and marketer to uncover opportunity and to act upon them. Okay, so far Japanese share about what key player thinks and what they plan to do. Johannes share with us how to adapt to change, how to take opportunity. So let's dive in with Alexis now on the new trend, and more specifically in the local community in Singapore. Alexis, over to you.
Thank you, Ingrid. Let me just get the share screen up. Is it? Okay. Are we all good? Yes, Ingrid, is it? Okay, great. Okay, hi everyone. Good afternoon to everyone. It's very nice to be here. My name's Alexius, and I run a small little business with many tentacles in Singapore, which is very highly involved in the urban farming movement here in Singapore, and as well as overseas in the Southeast Asian countries. So today what I'll be talking is to give some interesting observations that I'm noticing on the ground level that would substantiate what has been wonderfully kind of presented by the data in the previous two presentations. So we're going to take a look at three major trends that I noticed, and then we'll see whether any good extrapolated ideas may come from that. Okay. So just a quick background on myself. I come from a geography background. So my passion is really kind of nature and trees. So my nickname is a tree hugger. So I really come from this nature-based kind of background. Got my first experience in the working industry with the national parks in Singapore. And that's where we picked up a lot of the greening and horticulture and arboriculture practices. And then I spent a year working in a social non-government organization in the Philippines, where they were focusing on social enterprises that were nature-based and creating jobs and creating incomes for the lower income part of the population. From then on, I went on to explore other countries like Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia, as well as my home country, Singapore. Okay, so after I came back from the Philippines mainly, I came back with this idea that in Singapore, we're always told that we don't have enough land to produce the food that we need to eat. And what I realized in the Philippines through the experiences there was that we do have a lot of land in Singapore, but we're using it to grow ornamental, poisonous kind of like plants around the country, right? So it's very aesthetically kind of like beautiful, productive, but it's not productive in the realm of food production. So after learning quite a bit of stuff from the Filipino culture, decided to come back and start building farms that were based on food productivity, but at the same time also incorporating a lot of the landscaping concepts. So how can we make gardens beautiful as well as productive? Okay, so this was transformed. A simple garden can be transformed from a grass field into a very productive ecosystem that has every single plant in it is either a herb, medicinal plant, vegetable, fruit, or some kind of edible product. Okay, so this is where my company started. So it's very simple in a way. It's just a simple company, but we look at our mission is basically to educate people on how can they start producing their own food. So we have a training institute, which is the Center for Nature Literacy and Enterprise, and that's where we do a lot of training. And then the other side, we do a very strong community-based project, which is to help people learn how to grow their own food, and then to give back to society by going around the island to build farms. So this has really taken off more than what I could imagine. So would like to share some of the things that we have observed from the community as we go on. So one of the trends that I would like to share is with the whole COVID situation, the trend, I think what was mentioned now is, everyone's very familiar with the idea of sustainability. And we definitely noticed like over the past 10 years, right, this urban farming sustainability idea has been brewing. It has really been like coiled up in a way, like a spring, right? So there's a lot of people talking about sustainability, a lot of experiments and stuff. And then all of a sudden, like COVID, we all know COVID came in as quite a major shock to the whole economy. And this really kind of was the catalyst that springboard and opened up this whole world of like people moving into real sustainable action. Like people wanted to not just know about sustainability, but they actually wanted to practice it. So one of the trends that I see picking up is, if you've not been familiar with this, one of the global movements in the world is actually this movement called permaculture. It comes from two words called permanent agriculture or permanent culture. And it's a way of it's a wealth of knowledge that helps people to understand how they can very systematically create and utilize resources to produce food. Right? So how do we diversify food production? How do we mimic nature and nature's patterns and systems to bring sustainable food production into the city and into the peripheral areas? So I work very closely in the realm of urban permaculture. And what we've noticed is that if you don't know this word or you don't know this movement, maybe one of the things is to check it out. Right? It's a growing movement that is definitely taking place in this whole food production industry. So what we've noticed is that we do conduct permaculture workshops. And over the past kind of a few months, from April to November, which was just kind of like in between and after the lockdown that we experienced in Singapore, is that we saw interest and inquiries and subscriptions for our workshops in the specific realm of permaculture by up to 47%, almost 50%. So there is a very strong kind of growing interest in this. And I think why people are starting to get interested in permaculture specifically is because in permaculture, we're always looking at small scale, small scale adoption, right? Doing things in small bits, looking at the resources that are available within the immediate space, and how to use those to grow food systems. So a lot of people are starting to think about their own houses and their own resources at home and looking at how to create high value crops on their balconies. How do you talk about vertical growing systems? And how do you even grow things like mushrooms, right? One of the very interesting companies in Singapore, their tagline is, their mission is to tell people in Singapore that if you don't have enough sunlight to grow vegetables, it doesn't mean that you should stop growing food. You should be growing mushrooms instead, right? So we're looking at people growing mushrooms. We're looking at people doing fermentation, which is basically growing of yeast and bacterial cultures. So these are all very interesting things that are coming up, and a lot of them are actually tied back to this movement called permaculture. So do think about considering leveraging on this movement. And a big part of it that's driving it and making it so appealing to people is that it has a very strong ethical core, which is based on 3 values: earth care, people care, and fair share of surplus. We won't go too much into them, but if you want to do research, you can think about how to leverage on these 3 values, which seem to kind of like appeal to a lot more people nowadays. All right. Another trend that's coming up that we kind of notice is, as mentioned by Japnit, is that there is a lot of focus and re-emphasis on quality of food, right? Restaurants, high-end restaurants are starting to think about providing quality rather than just mass kind of like huge burgers and quantities to try and lure their clients to come in. So how this trend is kind of fermenting, no pun intended, but the idea that people are getting more and more educated, right? The access to information on the internet is merging with a better education system in different countries in Southeast Asia. And people are starting to think about how we can move beyond just getting our calorie intake to start thinking about health and wellness, right? And people are starting to learn the distinction between what kind of produce is reliant on unsustainable practices or reliant on supply chains that, say, provide synthetic fertilizers and things like that. They're starting to look at more sustainable practices and starting to tell the distinction between what is really organic produce and what is the kind of sub-organic produce like hydroponics and things like that. Okay, so if you are a food producer, definitely think about maybe not making a full transition into organic, but you might want to start thinking about how the way you present yourself can reach out to this more highly educated segment of society and this growing trend. We did conduct quite a series of live workshops because of the COVID lockdown that we had in Singapore. And what we noticed was that there is a growing interest in the idea of getting back to the soil. So people were really, really diving very, very deep into soil science. And we had at our workshop of about 14,000 people, we had 85% of the questions coming in asking, how do you grow soil-based produce? Which is quite a different trend that we saw 15 years ago when we were talking to people, and people were asking about hydroponics, right? How do we grow hydroponics vegetables? How do we grow high intense vertical hydroponic systems? Now people are not talking so much about hydroponics. They're starting to talk about how do we do organic-based or organic soil-based vegetable production. So it's an interesting trend that we see. And we also see in a lot of clients in Singapore that what they're buying are products that are that have an element of soil base. So we used to see a lot of clients of ours purchasing kind of small growing kits, right, that use water and very simplified kind of like water-based growing kits. Now they're moving into the realm of huge kind of growing systems that require soil, right? So there is a general shift in the interest. Okay, the final trend that we're kind of like noticing is this idea of foraging. I think when we look at the debate and the conversations that are happening, we're starting to see that the demographic change is starting to influence the way that we consume our food, right? It's not just about how everyone's getting more and more educated, which is partially because of technology and access to information, but the millennial generation is starting to have its own, is creating its own markets, right? You're looking at a new world of influencers, digital influencers. You're looking at younger people thinking about, you know, not so much about like, let's save money and like get the cheaper stuff, but let's start thinking about how they start valuing memories and novel experiences, right? So this idea of uh, learning about local plants, right, that are growing locally, that no one knows about. So it's this idea of like finding the hidden gems within your own country, or finding plants that used to be eaten by our grandparents, but now no one knows about. So we see a lot of online workshops and things talking about wartime food plants. We see a lot of high-end restaurants that are starting to learn about local weeds that you can find by the roadside, and they're using these things to make very interesting flavors that are coming up. So we're looking at this kind of hunger for premium and local and unique ingredients that are put together in a very interesting way. There is a very interesting picture and a very interesting story of on the screen, which is one of my clients actually came to me to learn how to grow edible plants, and he's actually a chef, right? So he's more into cooking. And then he came to my workshop to learn how to cook with different kinds of foraged foods, right? Different kinds of plant species that most people don't know about. And then he realized that when he got home, he tried to grow all these things and they were all eaten up by snails. So what he did was that he turned his snails, he caught them all, and then he turned them into like a little fine dining dish with like the local foraged weeds, and then posted it on Facebook. And he got amazing, amazing responses from people talking about, hey, you know, why are we not eating the pests that are eating our vegetables, right? How can we be a little bit more creative about the way we look at our food systems, and how do we diversify the ingredients that we use? So another thing that we notice is that in Singapore specifically, over the past 15 to 20 years, we have been struggling with trying to produce organic food, because the organic farmers in Singapore are trying to produce the kind of vegetables that the market wants. And the taste of Singaporeans is a very international kind of European kind of taste. So we try to grow kale, we try to grow all these kind of rosemary and really kind of exotic plants that are not within our local endemic environment. And we cannot hit the production targets. And so the government is not really very supportive of organic soil-based growing. But recently, over the past few years, there have been a lot of educators and influencers that have been coming up. And these have been working very closely with the organic farmers to kind of to create a new market for these farmers. So the trend that we're starting to see is that farmers, if they want to produce organic, they can't hit the targets because they're trying to grow things that are not easy to grow in Singapore. But with the partnership and with the help of educators who know about the local flora and fauna, right, the educators are starting to create a new different taste bud. And now these farmers are starting to produce local foods and local plant species that don't need pesticide and are really super productive in the tropical kind of environment. And now we're starting to see that, okay, we're starting to hit the production targets using organic practices. So I think it's really that explore looking at how educators and influencers and new media can actually start to create new markets for you, rather than trying to meet the demands of the old market, right? Start looking at partners and branding and educators who can do that. Okay, so in permaculture, we have a very simple saying that, you know, the solution is always found in the problem. It's kind of like a Blair statement, but it's true. And I think we are really going through a time of transition. If we are positive and really looking out for how we can evolve with the times, I think that's a really interesting exciting experience and moment for a lot of businesses within the food industry, as we are going through a lot of like physical as well as systemic change. Okay, so that's all I have for now. Very open to hearing any questions about what's happening on the grassroots in terms of the food industry. So back to you, Ingrid. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alexis. That was a very interesting sharing. And again, sustainability, food security, a key area to tackle in our pre-vaccine business environment. We really are running behind, so do not hesitate to send email if you have to go. We're still going to take question now, but if you have to go, there's still an option to either listen again to the webinar or to send us an email that we can tackle later. So let me go through the questions that have been asked by the audience. So I'm going to start with a question for Alexius regarding the urban center. Do you think one day this kind of urban center are going to grow to the point that the food produced will be able to meet the need of the residents? Or do you think it's more niche?
Yeah, now it's, oops, sorry. Am I still on? Yes, I am. Okay. So now it's definitely still niche. But I think as COVID, starts to shift the way our resources are reallocated, we are definitely going to start looking, going to start seeing resources morph. The use of resources that we have are going to start morphing. So what I mean is like now urban farms are really struggling because we're not able to pay the rent, right, in urban spaces. But if you start thinking about how we're all starting to work remotely now, my concern is really about what's going to happen to all the office spaces or all the infrastructure that we have. Is it going to start shifting, which I think is probably going to start shifting into looking at new needs, right, which are coming up. And one of the needs is definitely food production. So at the moment now, we're not really able to feed our population. But I think with the changing times, there is a chance that food production is actually going to start moving into the infrastructure that we already have. And that will start to spike the food production levels.
Thank you. The next question will be for Johannes regarding the business model Canva. So someone is asking basically if the business model Canva is something rather temporary for COVID or is more something permanent that can be used over time.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Ingrid. Good questions, actually. The business model canvas, we have one good example where there's a restaurant nearby where we live. Actually when during the COVID, during the lockdown, they survive only based on delivery and takeaways. And then when the government started to loosen up a bit, and these restaurants maintain the business model that they had during the lockdown. And then on top of that, they added this new business model, which is mostly delivery and takeaways to the old business model. So there's a little innovation or evolution there, and which in the end make this is according to the key staff there that made the business even grew even better. So whatever the business model we have, similarly like in the other industries, for instance, like in Spire, where normally you travel, but now after the COVID ends, probably will be a more combination between like this and business travel. So in the end, lower cost for traveling, but still more productive. I guess everyone here works double compared to if you have to go to the office. For instance, saving the time to go from home to the office is already saved like maybe 2 hours. So the business model will stay before COVID, added with what we have now, it becomes more solid, stronger, I believe. That's hopefully it's answered questions. Thank you. Good questions.
Thank you, Johannes. And does it apply to every single area of the food industry, or is there something that can be applied at a much higher level?
It's this model, business model canvas, can be applied in any industry. But then if I think we can discuss, the person who asked can discuss more with Spire also into more detailed. I believe they have their own elements to discuss with whoever asked questions. So it can be applied by anyone, any kind of industries. Even we saw the users is big companies, startups, matured company, big companies like Microsoft. They even use business model canvas. And back to the questions, yes, it can be used by any food industry players. Just talk to Spires, and then I can explain a bit more. I guess like that.
Thank you. We have 3 questions that are more either country specific or regional specific. So the question in a nutshell are asking if we expect the trend to be different across regions, or in particular for India, or there will be some differences. Sorry, I'm not too sure who wants to take the question. Maybe Japneet?
So
the way to really look at whether things will sustain post-COVID is to look at what was happening before COVID. And a lot of the trends that we're talking about today, home delivery, health consciousness, sustainability consciousness, nationalization, localization, all of these trends were happening.
All of these trends
technology
were happening. Technology.
I mean, gardening, all of this stuff actually.
Gardening, all of this stuff actually.
These were
reflect back, these were micro trends that were already there. Even before COVID sort of took off. And what COVID has really done is not set us into a parallel universe or a parallel market. It's just accelerated the future. It's rather abruptly thrown us into the future. Now, once all of this is settled, yes, there will be some corrections, but we were going there anyway. So a lot of these trends, the answer to whether they will stick or not is, well, we were going there at a slower pace. So I'm optimistic that a lot of the stuff is going to stay. Yes, we will be able to move around and eat out, but as Johannes mentioned, it is going to become a hybrid, and these are all in the sustainable sort of direction.
Thank you, Japneet. Okay, so one last question. Okay, I have to select. One question is interesting, very specific. Do you guys think that consumers are getting more price conscious? So I guess this question could be both for Japneet and Alexius. Maybe Alexius, you want to start? If you have an answer.
Wow, it's interesting. I think it depends on which segment of the society you're looking at, right? It's kind of hard to say whether they're being price conscious or not. Maybe give me a little bit more time. Japneet, would you like to go first if you have a point? I'll think about mine.
Yeah, I'm gonna be more decisive and give you a rather oversimplified answer. So the short version of my answer is no, customers are not more price sensitive. I think there is a genuine willingness to pay premium now. And Alexis, I agree with you. It's a complex question. Not everybody, but I think that's going to be the trend that we're seeing. I mean, the counter argument, of course, is, well, people have lesser to spend. They've got to be conservative because economic times are hard. But I think what the crisis has done, and going for more conscious about what quality really means. So they understand ingredients now. They understand health and sugar alternatives and fat alternatives and things like that. And with that understanding, I think there's going to be a willingness to see that they can see. So it's going to go broad level, and it will turn into people not making a purchase rather than buying a cheaper version of that that product or of that food.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that. I think the trend that I'm seeing in the community that I'm reaching out to is that people are definitely educated consumers. So if they see the value in your product, they will pay for it. And together with the fact that no one can travel now, you've got a little bit more cash, at least in the short term. But I think what is reaching out to consumers now is more of it's products who are able to reach out based on a fear element rather than a desire element. Okay, what I mean by that is people are not buying because it's a luxurious brand. I think people are a little bit more educated. They can tell the difference between whether the luxurious brand is kind of like playing up the value or it really has value. But what people are a little bit more driven by nowadays is this sense of, especially young millennials who have this culture of distrust. I think that the older generation may, believe in bigger economic global systems, believe in government more, but the younger generation is starting to look at self-empowerment, like looking into foraging, looking into these kind of trends. And so the people are moving into consuming products that reach out to them by saying that, this idea that, you want to eat healthy because you don't want to get cancer, right? Or people are they're moving into trends and moving into things that they want to consume because they're trying to prevent something bad from happening. So that is what I'm seeing. So if your product is marketing or reaching out to its clients based on, that it's a health product and, there are a lot of research that have backed up our product and it's going to help you live a more healthy life and it's going to give you a better life, a longer life, and reduce your risk of cancer and, stuff like that, then you might be able to push up the price a little bit more. But you can't push up the price just by saying you're a luxury brand and people are going to buy it.
Thank you. That makes sense. All right, I guess the webinar has reached to the end. So thank you very much to all the speakers to have taken the time to share with us some interesting trend, business model, your view, etc. Thank you for the audience. I hope you find the sharing session today very insightful. Should you have any questions remaining that haven't been addressed today, or if you want to know more about Spire database, feel free to drop us an email and have a great day ahead and stay safe. Thank you.